speak about the agricultural model at all, regardless if it was him. Okay, is everyone comfortable with it? Yes? Okay. So I'm going to ask some questions. One thing that will become apparent is I'm not an artist, so you just got to keep that in your minds. So the first thing I want to ask us is so let me ask this question first. What does the agricultural model do for us? What is the purpose of it? Progression, growth of what? Explain that a little bit more. So my brother said progression or growth.
Growth of plants and how our lives mimic, follow that. And each stage of its progression is what it's supposed to be. If it's healthy.
So you're using the cycle of agriculture to do what? You're pretty much saying it. What do you do with that line of agriculture, or that the cycle of agriculture? You just said it. You pretty much said that. I'm just adding those words to you. You take it and you bring it against your life.
Yes.
You say, so I have this agricultural model, or this agricultural cycle from the beginning of the cycle to the end of the cycle, from the beginning of the field to the harvest time. And with that cycle, I'm going to use that cycle or that model, that natural progression of events, and I'm going to compare whether it's my life or history or something else, events, to this model, and it's going to show me a structure. We comfortable with that? To put it another way, it's parable. It's using the natural world to explain the spiritual world, something deeper, a deeper truth. So how does the agricultural model begin?
With the
Plowing. What's before the plow? A field of thorns, fallow ground, those kind of things. So you have a fallow ground here. And a fallow ground is what kind of ground? How do we describe fallow ground? Unworked, unused, thorny, unprepared. It's just ground. It's like we went outside and we want to plant in the grass. That's fallow. The grass would be fallow. It's not fit. What it's not is it's not fit for purpose at this point. The purpose of it is to plant and to grow and to go through the cycle, but it's not ready for that yet. So I have my field. I've desired it. I have the desire to plant, and I picked out my field, but it's fallow. What do I do now? I'm going to plow it. So I'm going to take an amount of time, and I'm going to bring my plow to this ground. So I have the plowing that's going to take place now. And what does the plowing do for us? Breaks up the fallow ground. It prepares the soil. So this is the I'll just put prep of soil. Now that our soil is prepared, what are we ready to do? We're ready to plant the seed. So now we plant our little seed here. And what comes once we plant our seed? Because we've timed it appropriately.
Rain.
The rain's going to come. Which rain? The former or early rain. I'll put early rain. ER, early rain. The early rain comes followed by what? The latter rain. And what is the work of the early rain? To germinate the seed, to get that life process started. You need the seed plus water to activate it. And then we have the germination of this little seed. It's going to grow, germinate, and spring up. And what's going to happen with the latter rain? What does the latter rain do? It ripens it. So it's going to ripen it in preparation for what? The harvest. Okay, now this model from fallow to harvest, this whole cycle, as we said before, we can use this, and as hopefully we're all familiar with, is we can use this line and we can bring it into all sorts of different things. We can bring this parable into all sorts of different things, and it'll tell us something. It's going to create structures for us. This is just the reform line seen in another way. Because let me say, what we're familiar with is, if I erased all the, I'm not going to, but if I erased all of these things, let me say it this way. Okay. So if we look at the reform line, just to show this point. So if we go back to 1989, so we're on our reform line, and we go back to 1989, and we know that there's a series of events that are going to come from 1989 to the Sunday Law. And what begins at the Sunday Law? What are we familiar with? What begins there? The loud cry. What is the loud cry? What's another word for it? The latter rain. So the latter rain begins here. So we have the latter rain in this history. And then we have Daniel 12:1. So what we've done, or just by saying that this history from Sunday Law to Daniel 12:1 is the latter rain, which is something Sister White does. She's going to do that for you. You don't even have to guess at it. When she brings us this, what has she done? What has she placed into our line here? Part of the agricultural model, and the key word is part. Part of the agricultural model. Do you have a ruler here by chance? You guys don't have a ruler. Okay. I'll use a pencil. It'll work. So a ruler would work better because this is small. So imagine that this pencil is the, no, it's fine. This pencil is the entire agricultural model. You have fallow ground all the way to harvest at the end with the pencil tip is. So can you have the latter rain without the early rain? No. Can you have harvest without a fallow field? You need all of it together. It all comes as a package deal. You know, you can't just pull out the latter rain and say, look, we have just the latter rain here, nothing else. But so what we have here is sort of that scenario. We have Sister White identifying for us that the Sunday Law history is the loud cry or the latter rain history. Now, what she's done, as we said before, she's given us part of the agricultural model. But being good students of Bible prophecy that we are, we know that there's no such thing as just a part of this line. You need the whole line or you get none of the line. It's either all or nothing. So if I have one piece of this puzzle, what can I do with that one piece? I can put the rest of my puzzle together. So if I gave you just the latter rain, and you have this point here, you should be able to create the rest of the line. The point before it, you know, is a question mark. The point after it, you know, all the different points along the line you should be able to find because you have an anchor point. Does that make sense? So once we acknowledge the anchor point, and if you're really careful, and if you read properly, you'll notice that in the Bible and in the Spirit of Prophecy, she gives us many of these singular anchor points. You know, she'll give you this is the latter rain, or this is the something about harvest, or this is that. You know, she'll just pull out one piece. And as students of prophecy, we can take that little piece of the puzzle, you know, the one piece we have here, and we can say, okay, I can construct a whole line without any other information from her. I should be able to create the whole line because I know that the agricultural model has to come as an entire piece. It's like a ruler. It's a measuring line. And you take that line and you hold it up against history. You hold it up against your life, or let's say history for a moment. You take the agricultural model, you put it up against history, and it cuts you out this little nice line in history. And what it does when you do that is it eliminates all of the superfluous information, all the other stuff. You know, so for instance, if we have the history of, we'll say, and this isn't an actual application, I just want to use it as an example. So we have the history from, we'll say from Israel. No, we'll do this. So this we'll call this the beginning. Call this the beginning of Pyrrhus' father. Are we all familiar with Pyrrhus? Who Pyrrhus is? I'm spelling it's 2 H's, right? Or 2 Y's?
2
2
R's.
2 R's, not wrong letter.
Who's related to
P-
Alexander's? P-Y-R-R-H-U-M.
Okay. So we'll say this is Pyrrhus' father. In history, we're just looking at events. And then we have Pyrrhus. He's born. Then we have the wars. So, we have some of the wars. Then we have another war. Then we have this thing. Then we have Rome somewhere down here. So it's a long stretch of history that we have here. That's all I want to illustrate. And I acknowledge it's probably not to scale or anything. But anyway, so you have this long stretch of history. And there's a lot of useless information in this history. Maybe useless is the wrong word, but irrelevant for now. There's a lot of information here that is not necessarily germane to this particular point, though maybe everything can be used. I'm not sure. But what I do is I take my agricultural model and I say, okay, I need to be able to break this history up because I can't put 1,000 years on the line. You could if there's a line that shows that, but probably there's some fractals in there. There's smaller pictures in there. So I take my agricultural model and I hold it up against the line and I shift it around and I find an anchor point. Maybe Sister White gives me one. Maybe the Bible gives me one. And I find my anchor point. And let's say right in the middle of the line here is the latter rain. And so I find it and I put latter rain right here. Okay, I'm sure of this point. And now I've just cut out a section of history. And everything else on either side of it is irrelevant. And it just shows me that I have this one section of history that I'm looking at that is the agricultural model for this. Does that make sense? Okay, so we can do that. And not only can we do that, we're required to do that. We're required to do it. We're required to know how to do that. So it's something I want to talk about today. So we said here, Sister White gives us this little anchor, which now that we have the agricultural model placed over this is just obvious. It's like the first person to come up with the toothpick. It's like obviously we needed a toothpick or, the toothbrush or something. You needed that. It would have been obvious now after the fact, but it wasn't so obvious before that time. But once Elder Parmenter developed the agricultural model and he placed it right here, he took his pencil or he took his line and he placed it here and had this anchor point. It all became very obvious, the whole rest of the structure. So my point is that you can have one piece of the puzzle and create the rest of your puzzle. You can put it all together.
So it's like a clue.
It's a clue. You're an investigator. You're a prophetic, at one level, you're a prophetic investigator, and your duty is that you have certain clues and you need to put together a full picture. Not just a picture, but a story. You need a plot. You need to explain all the different things that are going on in this investigation. Okay, so this is our model here. This is our agricultural model. And now what I want to do is I want to look at this quotation and I want to show us that there's something in this quotation that brings us to this line. So let's read that. If you have it, your note, or if you have Greek Controversy, 1888, page 440. Okay. Now I'm cutting into this chapter, of course, and she's talking about the United States and its rise to power and as a kingdom of Bible prophecy. And so let's read this. We'll read the paragraph I want to look at starts with what nation of the New World? We see that? What nation of the New World? Okay. What nation of the New World was in 1798 rising into power, giving promise of strength and greatness and attracting the attention of the world? The application of the symbol admits of no question. One nation and one only meets the specifications of this prophecy. It points unmistakably to the United States of America. Again and again, the thought, almost the exact words of the sacred writer have been unconsciously employed by the orator and the historian in describing the rise and growth of this nation. So what sacred writer is she talking about? Does anyone know? Well, not Daniel, the other one. John. She's talking about John. She's quoting Revelation 13, and you'll see that here in a moment. So let's continue. The beast was seen coming up out of the earth. This is Revelation 13, verse 11. We'll read that in a moment. And according The beast was seen coming up out of the earth, and according to the translators, the word here rendered coming up literally signifies to grow up, to grow or spring up as a plant. And as we have seen, the nation must arise in a territory previously unoccupied. A prominent writer describes the rise of the United States, speaks of the mystery of her coming up from the vacancy, and says, like a silent seed, we grew into empire. So I want to stop there for just a moment. So let's go to Revelation 13. And just put some context on that. Revelation 13, and we're going to look at the whole chapter, but she's quoting from verse 11. So before we talk about the connection to the agricultural model, let's just give some clarity. So I want to ask a question. I need someone to, if someone will tell the story of Revelation 13 for us. What is the story of Revelation 13?
The two beasts, the sea beast and the land beast.
So the two beasts, my sister here said we have the two beasts, we have the land beast and the sea beast. Brother Paul, you said something of the image of the beast. Okay, yep.
There's one beast that's bad, that does a lot of bad stuff. It persecutes and causes troubles. And then another beast comes up that's nice and happy and innocent, and then it turns into the likeness of Christ.
Amen. So what I want, and this is a good contrast in stories, is the story, and I'm not picking on you, the story that Sister Elaine gave us and Brother Paul gave us were facts. It wasn't a story. They were just, there's the image of the beast here, there's another beast, there's one beast, there's two beasts, one comes from the sea, one comes from the land. Our sister here gave us a story. She told us a plot. There's a plot. There was a bad beast, and this bad beast did all of these things. It persecuted, and you can see that from the chapter. If you look at 1 through 10, it's pretty much all the bad things that this first beast that comes out of the sea is going to do. And note the location, it's coming up out of the sea. So this beast is going to do all of these bad things, and what is this beast described as? Let me ask that better. What are its characteristics of this beast? What are the characteristics of the beast? The first beast, the sea beast.
It has all the characteristics from the previous beasts.
Yeah, it's like a
Okay.
in the form of leopard. Yeah.
So, okay, so someone read these characteristics to me. So we have our first beast. So we have a leopard. Oops. Let me spell it right. So we have a leopard, we have a bear. Next, lion. And
The dragon.
dragon gave power to this beast. So you have the characteristic, you have the dragon also represented here. Okay. So this is our first beast. And this is a bad beast. Why is this a bad beast? Now, there's two ways you can come to the badness of this beast. What is one way? There's probably more than two ways, but there's two that I can think of in this moment. What is one way we can identify the badness of this beast?
Verse 1, it says it has a head. On his head, the name of blasphemy.
So blasphemy is bad. So we're going to say, okay, it's symbolized by blasphemy, which is a bad thing. Amen? Yep.
It says it makes war with the saints.
It makes more war with the saints, so the saints are good, which means if you're making war with them, that's bad, my brother?
He gets power from the dragon.
He gets power from the dragon, and what do we know about the dragon?
The dragon is persecuted.
From where? Where's this?
Well,
From 12, the previous chapter. So what is 13 doing? At one level, it's connecting you to chapter 12. How does chapter 13 begin? What's the first word? And. What does and mean? Continuing. I'm continuing a thought. 12 and 13 are one continuous thought. You can't separate one from another. You need them both to have a complete thought. And the really easy way to see this, other than just the word and, is the fact that it's going to talk about a dragon. And if you don't bring in chapter 12, you have no idea what dragon is being talked about here. But chapter 12 describes this dragon, this persecuting power that's going to make war with the woman. So we know we have all these bad characteristics. How else can we know that this is a bad thing? Someone already said that makes war of the saints. So let's put that question on pause. Let's put a pin in that for a moment.
Power is transferred from
The power from dragon to,
beast.
okay, yep, we can use that as well. So let's jump down to verse 10. Can somebody read verse 10 for us? Leading into captivity.
He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints.
Okay, so pretty much what this is telling us is that this beast was leading into captivity and killing by the sword. And because of that, following the words of Christ, whatever measure you meet, you shall be met. They're going to get that in kind. So if they led into captivity, they're going to go into captivity. If they killed by the sword, they're going to be killed by the sword. Okay? So my sister, when she told us this story of Revelation 13, she told us that it starts off with a bad beast. You have this bad beast doing bad things, and there's going to be another beast. And the second beast is instead of coming up from the sea, it's going to come up from where? The earth. So just quickly, before just a little side note, where do you plant seeds? In the earth. So in the ground. So you can't plant a seed in the water. I guess you could. I mean, hydroponics, naturally it's not normal. So we can get around nature almost in some ways. So you can, normally seeds are planted in the ground. So just note that here, just for when we come back to the agricultural model. So verse 11. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. So then it says this, and he exercised all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. So how did my sister describe the second beast? Was it a good beast or a bad beast? It was a nice beast. What?
Started out good.
Do you see that? Where does it tell you that it started off good and became bad?
He had 2 horns like a lamb, so a lamb is gentle, and he spake as a dragon. The dragon is bad.
Where do you get progression out of that?
No, it's the same plot. There's an end too.
It's always bad, but 2 horns are keeping it from being bad.
Okay, so Mr. said maybe it's always bad and 2 horns keep it from being bad. All I want you to see without answering that question is that you've read something into the verse that's not explicitly there. And so you're already on dangerous ground. You've brought information that you have, correct information, my sister. There's progression there. You've brought... There's a comma.
Maybe that's the progression, because in another verse, all it takes is a second.
So we have this verse, and what I want us to see is we're very easily, by accident, by no intention of our own, going to read things we already know about it in here. We're going to take spirit of prophecy. We're going to take things we've heard from other people, and we're going to read it into this verse automatically. You can't help yourself but do it because you just have that information. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous to use other information when you come to passages, depending on when you do that in the process. So now we're talking about methodology, which is all part of this, and this is sort of what we're talking about here. So all it says is this: I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. So what we see here, I would suggest, is not very good. It doesn't bode very well for this beast. It says he's going to exercise all the power of the first beast, that he spake as a dragon. You have these lists, and you actually could go through the rest of the chapter of the bad things that this beast is going to do. But my sister, she set it up that there was a bad beast and a good beast. That there's a bad beast in the beginning and a good beast that comes up later. And my question is, how do we know that this is a good beast?
I have a question.
Yep.
For the way it's talking here, it seems like everything is happening in an instant. There's a beast that has 2 horns. It speaks as a dragon. It's all happening simultaneously. But in the first verse it says, "And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth," which is a period of time,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Of growth, because you're like Ellen White then says, it's like a budding out, so it's like a growth process.
Mhm.
So if,
You're speaking to progression.
yeah, so
Yep.
I think it's might be in there.
There's absolutely progression here. I'm not gonna try to argue there's not.
But
I want us to get there,
Yeah.
to progression. But so how do we first? Let's deal before we talk about anything on progression. How do we know that this is a good beast? So it's a lamb. We have a lamb, but it's a dragon, right? There's something
No, it said
He has
it speaks
two-
like a dragon.
There's two horns.
out of the abundance of
He
the
has
heart,
two
the mouth
horns
speaketh.
like a lamb.
So there's something going on with this animal. It's got there's some dragonness to it.
Even the beginning.
I'm not saying if it's in the beginning. I just want you to see what the verse says. The verse says you have a lamb that's also a dragon. I mean, there's a characteristic of this beast that's lamb-like, and there's characteristics of this beast that's like a dragon, right?
Does it say that it's a lamb?
It doesn't say lamb-like.
Yeah,
It's two
two
horns
horns like a lamb.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it could be a scary monster. Two
Okay.
horns like lamb. Say.
It's a beast that has two horns like a lamb before it Middle Persia.
Okay, so we want to bring in the idea of Medo Persia.
But then if you're looking literally at a lamb, I don't think they have horns. Yeah,
But-
so
Little-
there's some little tiny possibilities, like
Little tiny possibilities.
Sister here was talking about the growth. They don't start out very big.
Mhm.
And they're not sharp or pointy or violent. They're just soft.
So you
Horns are power and strength.
horns represent something. That's all we need to know. That this lamb, it tells us it has horns. This has two horns like a lamb. My brother.
Also talked about the deadly wound being healed.
Okay.
So they're both have the deadly wound healed. Almost like they're same.
What do you mean? Who's the other? You're marking two deadly wounds there.
Well, it says in chapter 3, I saw one of his heads that was wounded to death, and the deadly wound was healed.
Mm-hmm.
It's the first piece.
It's the first beast that's being talked about.
Okay.
The first beast gets a deadly wound. And so in verse 10, it said, "He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth by the sword must be killed by the sword." The one that's killing and leading into captivity is the first beast. It's the fifth kingdom of Bible prophecy. We'll just say for simplicity, the papacy. And it's going to receive a deadly wound in 1798. And that deadly wound is because of all the bad things that it did previously. So it gets led into captivity. It gets killed by the sword. And eventually, the second beast is going to resurrect the first beast. It's going to heal that wound for it. But that's a later time and progression. But regardless of that, the question we're asking is, how do we know that this is a good beast and not a bad beast? How can my sister say it's a good beast? What? It's in this verse.
Isn't
It's
it
there.
because of the lamb quality. That
It's the lamb qualities.
gentle, and you look at a lamb, they're pretty innocent looking, and maybe they spar a little bit with their other lamb brethren. But they're in this period of growth, so they're not very strong yet.
So the second beast has lamb-like qualities, but it also has some sort of dragon qualities.
The great
Also comes
controversy
out of a
says
different
the
place.
lamb-like horns indicate youth.
Don't read.
No,
Oh.
no.
We're only in the verse.
Whoa.
Oh,
Whoa, my brother.
I missed that part.
You've broken the cardinal rule.
My bad.
And what's the cardinal rule, my sister? Stay in the verse. Why do we have to stay in the verse? Why is my brother wrong for reading Ellen White?
He's been
Well,
educated.
You don't have to read White. You can take that as verse 2. It says 2 horns.
No, but regardless of that, we have the conundrum of, I'm saying that it was dangerous for him to bring in the spirit of prophecy. Why is it dangerous for him to bring that in here? Anyone?
Probably because if you're not reading it correctly, you're going to come to the wrong.
Okay, so there's a question of reading. But why would it be dangerous to bring Sister White's words into this?
It's a preconceived notion. Maybe it's not.
Is Sister White wrong?
No,
No.
that we might make a wrong application. For
Yeah.
We might make a wrong application. So Sister White is going to make applications throughout all of her writings. She's going to say, for instance, when she talks about the agricultural model, she'll apply it to the human heart, to the human salvation, and she'll say, the germination of the seed is the beginning of spiritual life in the Christian. What's that? It's an application. It doesn't say, the Bible doesn't say that the seed germinating is the beginning of spiritual life. It doesn't say that. She's taking the agricultural model and she's applying it to the individual life. She's 100% correct. She can do that. But she's doing it within the context of looking at a certain thing, a certain lens she's looking through. And her lens is she's looking at the agricultural model through the individual salvation of a soul, of a person. And then she'll say that, you have the growth of the plant represents the sanctification process. And then she'll talk about the harvest process, that there's always a point to where you do a certain work, and she'll talk about all these things. And what I want us to see there is not that she's wrong. Right? Ellen White's always right. She's a prophet. But she might not be speaking to the thing that you're looking at the same way that you're looking at it, or what the Bible meant. So for instance, Christ, if we take the agricultural model, doesn't explicitly say that he's talking about individual salvation. Sister White's going to take what Christ is saying and apply it to individual salvation. We're going to take the agricultural model, the exact same thing that she's looking at, and we're going to say it's not talking about individual salvation, it's talking about events, history. And we're going to say that this history can even be so broad as to say that the latter rain represents the history of the Sunday law. So you see the difference? She's saying it's individual salvation, but in another place we can say it is talking about the reform line. Actually, she's going to make the conclusion that the latter rain is the Sunday law. She's going to do that for us. So what I want us to see is that even in the agricultural model, she has multiple applications. And the problem is you don't know, if you don't read carefully, you don't know what application she's making. And it may throw the point off. It may throw you off in your reading of the passage. Because in Revelation 13, we have to first figure out the original intent of the passage. We have to figure out the context and original intent. And once we have that, then we can start making applications with it. Then we can start seeing what Sister White's applications with it are. So I'm not saying she's wrong. I'm just saying we need to
exhaust what we see in here first.
We need to stay in the verse first, and then once we understand the verse, then we walk into Spirit of Prophecy and see what she says about it. Yes, sister?
In that verse, it says that it comes up out of the sea. Completely opposite. So if it came out of the sea and it's bad, coming up out of the earth would be the opposite.
So, okay, yeah.
I don't know if you let me, but I already know, I think, because I watched it.
Don't. So this one comes up out of the sea. And this one comes up out of the earth. So what is that called? Compare and contrast. We have two beasts. We have the first beast and the second beast. And these are the animals that are connected to the first beast. And this is the location that beast comes out of. We look at the second beast. The second beast, these are the animals connected to it. And this is the location it comes out of. And I'll put the location under the line, just so it's separate. Does that make sense? You have the animal characteristics followed by the location. Animal characteristics followed by the location. So when we look at them, we can put them on the board, and we can say, okay, let's compare and contrast them. What's the similarities of them, and what's the opposites of them? What's the similarities and what's the difference? So what similarities do we have? Both of them have animals to them, but just what's on the list here, both of them have the dragon represented in some way. You see that? But there's some differences. What are our differences? One, this one is a lamb. This one shows a lamb. This one doesn't.
Predators and prey.
Predators and prey. So now let's come back. So before we do that, so we have predators over here, and then we have prey and predator. Do you see that? You okay with that? And then we have a difference in location. One is sea, one is earth. So there's some differences, but there's a similarity, the similarity being the dragon. So as my sister said, these 4 here are predators. What do predators do? They eat stuff. They kill and eat, and they hurt other animals. So to be a predator is not a good thing, right? It'd be bad in this context. So you have predators, and then you have a prey. Lamb is prey. Lamb doesn't do any of those things. As my brother was saying, as my sister, you were saying before, lambs are gentle. They're meek. They're innocent to some degree. They're youthful. Lambs are baby sheep, so they're youthful. All of those things play into the description of what this lamb is. So we can look at the natural of a lamb. We can see that lambs are not predator. We can see all these other things about them. Their gentleness, their meekness, their innocence and youth. And we can compare that with the natural of a leopard, which is the exact opposite. Leopards are aggressive. They're not innocent. They've spilled blood. You can do the compare and contrast with a leopard and a lamb. So we can use the natural of these beasts to show us some lesson to them, to what they're showing prophetically. So I said before, I asked the question, how can we identify that this first beast is a bad beast? And we said that you can just read the passage, and the passage says it blasphemes, it fights the saints, it leads and kills, and leads into captivity and kills people. But another way you can do it is just to look at the characteristics of this beast and its animals. A leopard, a bear, a lion, and a dragon. None of those are good animals. They're all aggressive predator animals. And when you contrast them to the second beast, the lamb, at least the lamb aspect of this beast, all of those are opposites. And to be gentle and meek is to be good, while to be aggressive and a predator is to be bad. So from that perspective, just by the animals, we can see that there's a bad animal and good animal, which shows its characteristics, because the animal characteristics here are giving us symbols for telling us about this beast, or both of these beasts. So that was one thing we asked, that we answered just now. The other one was, how do we figure out if it's a good or bad one? And again, that goes into here about knowing these beasts. Or how do we know that the question one is, how do we know that this is a good beast? The second one, when we have some dragon problem here, the dragon speaks like a dragon, but has horns like a lamb. This beast is, because of its lamb-like qualities, we can identify it as good because of all the whatever a lamb is. Now, what's the problem between the lamb and the dragon here? They're opposites. It's a contradiction. So let me ask you this question. Can you have the heart of a lamb and speak as a dragon? Can you have the heart of a lamb and speak as a dragon? No, because we know that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So can a sweet fountain bring forth bitter water, or vice versa? No. So it can't be a lamb and a dragon at the exact same time, because they're opposites. I guess I could, but it wouldn't make sense. I can't shake your hand and punch you in the face at the same time. It just wouldn't. What story are you telling with that? It wouldn't make sense. You can't do opposite things at the same time. So these two are contradictions, and part of the fact that it is a contradiction is one of the things that allows us to see progression in this verse here, because of this contradiction. Because it can't be a lamb and a dragon at the identical moments, or it can't do those at the same time. Does that make sense? Those contradictions? Okay. So, and that's one way to see progression from this. And so we have the bad beast, we have the good beast, and this lamb-like beast is going to, we said it's going to have certain characteristics, and my brother started reading them, the youth, innocence, and whatnot. And so we'll read that passage now. So this is Great Controversy, 1888, 440, paragraph 441. So I'm not sure what, and it starts with, and he had two horns like a lamb. So it's going to describe that for us. But before we read this, so this is a little bit of an aside. what we've just done here. All I've wanted us to look at just briefly, ever so briefly, is the idea of methodology, is the idea of compare and contrast, parables, using the natural to illustrate the spiritual. And we've done a little bit of that, but that's not by any means where we want to go. We just wanted to do that for a moment to illustrate some points here as we look at Revelation 13, or to at least see that we can use Revelation 13 to question our own methodology, to see that maybe we haven't used the right methodology, or our methodology needs to change a little bit, our personal methodology, how we come to the conclusions of the first beast or the second beast, your different thoughts about them. So like I said, this was a little bit of an aside, but we want to get back to this now for a remainder of time. Okay. So we're going to make sort of an abrupt change, and it's just because of time. So now we're going to read the second paragraph. Okay, but actually before we do that, I need to mention one more thing. So let's switch back to, if you can jump in your mind back to the agricultural model here with me. We said that we have the fallow ground, we have the plowing, we have the early rain, we have the latter rain, we have the harvest, the full cycle. So where's the problem located on this line? If I told you that there's a problem that needs solved on this line, where would the problem be? What would the problem be? The fallow ground. Why the fallow ground? It's not good ground. It's bad ground. So I'm standing here. If you can imagine, if you can sort of put yourself out in the middle of a field, and you have a question. You have something you need to do. What do you need to do? You need to plant something, whatever it is. You need to plant something, but there's something standing in your way. And what is it? What did we just say? The fallow ground. The unbroken ground, the fallow ground before you is the problem that you have to answer. If you want this model, if you want the rest of this to go forward. So if the problem is the fallow ground, what's the solution? The plowing. Can we see that? What I want you to see is that there's always the idea of problem and solution. This is a reform line. What is a reform line supposed to do? What is a reform line?
To reform you.
To reform you. So what's the problem?
You aren't reformed, you've gone into a sick state, and you have to be reformed or reorganized as well.
You have to, so a reform line is there because you're broken. You're broken or you're dead. We'll say you're dead. So I'm standing here dead, and the reform line comes, so that's the problem. The reform line is going to come, the entire line, and what does this line do to me? It revives me. Revival and reformation, blending together. So the problem is death. The solution is life. But the solution doesn't happen all at once. There's a process to the solution. There's steps to the solution. Just like there was steps in getting me into the problem, there's steps to get me out of the problem. And that's what this reform line is. And that's what this whole thing is here. It's the reform line. It's the solution to the problem. Does that make sense? I lost anyone with that thought? Okay. So let's continue. Just needed to put that in place for just a moment. And he had two horns like a lamb. So she's quoting Revelation 13. The lamb-like horns indicate youth, innocence, and gentleness, fitly representing the character of the United States when presented to the prophet as coming up in 1798. So now we're going to just take that sentence. What did she say in the previous passage about coming up? What does to come up mean? Anyone remember? To spring up, to grow up. And she says this. I'll read that sentence again. This is from the previous paragraph. The beast was seen coming up out of the earth. And according to the translators, the word rendered coming up literally signifies to grow or spring up as a plant. So if I talk about plants, what am I talking about? The agricultural model. I've stepped right into that. So Revelation 13, verse 11, when it says coming up, the phrase coming up means to spring up as a plant, or how does it say to spring up as a plant? So what do I have here? What is, so this is Revelation 13 verse 11. What is Revelation 13, 11? What is that now? It's an anchor point.
Puts you on the line.
It puts me on the line. Where does it put me in this line? Where's my anchor point?
Growing up, you're gonna have the seeds that have to be planted to grow up.
Okay.
So it's right.
in the early rain.
So where do we want to put it? At this, which question mark? This one, or I guess we could say this is one too.
It grows in the early rain.
So you want to put it here?
Right there.
Okay. So it's placed us here now. Because we've taken our agricultural model and we say when something springs up, it's at the time when the seed and the rain come. So this is our anchor point we now have. So this is Revelation 13, 11. Do we see that? Is everyone okay with that? Everyone see how we got there? Anyone not see how we got there? Or is confused about that? Okay. So we took Revelation 13, 11. We saw that it says coming up equals, Sister White tells us that coming up equals to spring up as a plant based upon the translation of the words or the phrase. And we took that springing up as a plant to our agricultural model and we came to this point here. The transition from the point of the end of the plowing and the beginning of the early rain where the seed is planted and receives that early rain. We okay with that? Okay. So this is our anchor point. Now, what did we say our problem was now? Our problem is that we have these question marks, these other ones. This one's out. So we have these other question marks that we have to answer. But what did we say? If we have one, we have to be able to make the rest of it. It has to be there. It just takes a little bit of, as my brother was saying, investigative work. We need to find the clues and we need to put it together. Okay. So my next question. How do we put it together? So we have our anchor point, but how do we get to the next step? How do I create this point or this point or this point? What do I need to do? What would you do?
Go back to the original and look for more clues.
Okay, go back. I could go back to the original and look for more clues. Anything else?
Follow progression. There's a progression
Progression of what?
from the problem to the solution to.
Amen. So what is that? What would you call progression? What do we call in storytelling? What is progression? Building up of what? Of the storyline, of the plot or the theme. There's something that is getting developed from the beginning to the end. Now, there's a theme that gets developed. That's the best way to say it. There's a theme that gets developed from the beginning to the end. So you have your conflict, your problem, and now there's going to be some solution to that, and it's the development of that solution. So, which we're saying is a theme. So how would I determine what my theme is, or what my plot is? What process or what thing is being developed? Because as we said, this is the development of something. We had a problem, and the problem is going to get solved, and by this process here. But this is a development of something. What do we need to know? We need to go to the good beast and the bad beast, but what about the bad beast do we need to know? In terms of what we have here, what do we need to know first?
You have to know the character.
You need to know your problem. I can't answer a problem I don't know. So I can have my anchor point here of Revelation 13:11 where it says coming up, but if I don't have my problem, I have no idea what my solution is going to be. All I know is that I'm standing here out in the middle of the ocean, just on this little pillar. Does that make sense? So once we identify the problem, we can identify the solution to the problem and what that theme is. So what's our problem? Revelation 13:11. Tell me what our problem is. Or in that chapter, what's our problem?
Is it when the first beast rises up?
What, you tell me.
First one? Because that's another coming up, but it's called rise up.
So let me ask you this question. Why is Revelation 13:11? So I'm setting up a dynamic for you. I'm framing something where I say you have a problem and then you have a solution. And I'm placing Revelation 13:11, the coming up of this beast, as a solution to the problem. Do we see that? This beast, which is the second beast, by that definition of what I've laid out here, is actually part of the solution to the problem. We okay with that? Because it's part of the springing up process, which we know is the planting of the seed, and there's all this whole process, and it's the answer to the fallow ground. The planting of the seed and its growth is the answer to the problem here. So Revelation 13:11, the second beast, is part of the solution. So why is it part of the solution, my sister?
Well, I don't know if this answers that.
It's on the board.
Problem. I see the problem being the first beast.
Yes, the problem's the
Because
first
it
beast.
talks about persecuting. It's a persecuting power.
So with the language that's on the board, explain to me why. What about the second beast is the solution? The lamb. The lamb is the solution. All of these are the problem. The fact that it's a leopard or a bear or a lion or a dragon, all of these are problem areas. They're all bad characteristics. But the only good characteristic that we see on the board is the lamb. So the lamb becomes the solution to this problem. Does that make sense? And what did we say the lamb is in comparison to these? It's the opposite. If you want to know, this is kind of backwards, but if you want to know how to change your oil, what do you need to know about changing oil? How not to change oil. You need to know the opposite to know the thing. You need both of them together. And what is that called? It's comparing, contrasting, but what else would we call that? Juxtapositioning. Everyone know what juxtapositioning is? It's when you take two things and you bring them together and they conflict with each other. So for instance, a lamb and a leopard don't naturally want to be together. These two symbols are opposed to each other. One, they don't fit together nicely. It's like two magnets that you turn you put the polarity on the magnet the same way, or the same way, and they'll hit against each other, right? They won't ever connect, ever. That's what juxtapositioning is. It's that tension in between two symbols or two objects. So our two objects here are the leopard, or any one of these, and the lamb. And that's how we know, for us to know that if you have a ball and a square, if I asked you, what makes a ball so unique? You might give me a bunch of different answers. But if I tell you, what's the difference between a ball and a square, that's an obvious answer. But you don't know that answer unless I hold the square up in front of you and say, what's the difference between it and the ball? And you say one is round and one has, corners. So you can see definition as you bring two things together that you wouldn't have seen before. You're gathering clues. You're an investigator. Yep.
Another thing that I don't know if it fits with what you're saying, but it seems like a problem to me, is that in verse 10, that first beast dies. He who is led into captivity and killed by the sword is killed. So now you have a void, because you need a beast to keep things in charge. So now you have a void. You have fallow ground. It's empty. Nothing's there.
Mm-hmm. There's that.
No plants.
Yeah, you can come at it from that angle for sure. Of the void.
Sort of problem, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So when's the fulfillment of Revelation 13:11? When does it come up out of the earth? 1798. So we have, not only do we have a verse anchor, but we have a year. We can actually put a year on our line now. So the next question the question we still haven't answered yet fully is, we said we know what the problem is. What's the problem? It's the first beast. It's the things that the first beast was doing, which was persecuting and captivity. Persecution and captivity. So use juxtaposition. If I say you have persecution and you have captivity, and this is all under the first beast, which is the problem. And we're saying the second beast is the second beast has the solution. What is the opposite? What's the juxtaposition to persecution and captivity?
The freedom.
Freedom. Do we see that? It's the opposite. The first beast has the problem. Problem is persecution and captivity. This is how not to change the oil. And now we're going to see what the correct way to do it is, or the answer to the problem is, and that is freedom. It's the solution. So what does freedom become in this context? It becomes the solution. And what did we say we need? What is the solution going to do? What's the right way for that? So if freedom is the solution, I'll just say it. Freedom we're identifying as the solution, and we said that this solution gets developed over this period of time. What does that make freedom? Not necessarily the plant, but it makes it our theme. The theme to this plant. Well, it's the plot. It's my story. The plot is about freedom. The plot is about freedom. The theme is about freedom. So now that we know that we have the problem of persecution and captivity and we have the solution of freedom, we can come back to our line here with looking at 1798, Revelation 13, and we can say, okay, I know what my theme is. Now I can start filling in these blanks to talk about freedom. We can talk about freedom. We can talk about the persecution and captivity and how that's going to get solved. We okay with that? We see that? Okay. So now let's deal with quickly. Let's just talk about the end of this line. Now, where would we mark the end of this line? The harvest point, or the point where this process ends, the process of freedom. Why Sunday law? Because your freedom gets taken away. So let's remove Sunday law and use Revelation 13 to prove this to me. When it starts talking like a dragon, that's when the process is ended. When it's over. So the point of talking like a dragon, which is betraying or contradicting the lamb-like principles or the lamb-like attitude of this or characteristics of this beast. So without saying the word Sunday law, because Sunday law is not in this chapter, what do I put here?
Church and state constitution.
Speaking like a dragon, we can put. What else?
The image.
What about image? What does it say about the image?
That's not in the verse.
Not necessarily that verse is in the chapter, though, the image.
It shall cause it to both speak, the image of the beast shall both speak, and cause many that should not worship the image should be killed.
So we have speaking like a dragon, and we have the other thing you just said, we have the image of the beast. What's the image of the beast?
It's the first beast.
Using the chapter, what is the image of the beast?
The dragon. Well, I don't know. You got dragon.
Blasphemy.
Okay, blasphemy. Blasphemy is part of it. My sister, I think you said it, Mr. Schlesing. No, maybe not captivity. So what is an image?
Oh, it's a photocopy.
It's a photocopy. So the image of the beast is what? It's a copy of the beast. It's a photocopy of the beast. We took the first beast put it on a photocopier, pressed the button, and a little piece of paper came out, and this is the image of the beast. What's the difference between this beast and what's the difference between the image of the beast and the first beast? It's just a copy. It's time. You know, they're just one is over there and this one's this, but they're identical. One is the other, you know, because it's an image. So you have this image here. So it's the image of the first beast. It's a copy of the first beast. How do we know what? So you could say image is a copy, but what else does an image represent? So if I said you are, if like God said, you're made in God's image, what does that mean?
Shares the characteristics.
You share the characteristics. So we have to find out what the characteristics are of this first beast. What did we say? We've listed them already. We have blasphemy. We have persecution. We have captivity. We have a fighting against the saints. We have anything else? I'm missing that word. So 7 heads and 10 horns. We have all of these different things that come into play as the characteristics that will be part of this image here.
So if it is the image of the first beast, it must have lost the horns.
By this point, they'll both be broken. And our sister Elaine was talking in our last presentation, or the last two. She was talking about the United States being symboled by Antigonus. And Antigonus had how many eyes? Two eyes, like anyone else. How many of his eyes were? He had one eye that was wounded, and he had one eye that was remained intact. But how many horns does the United States have? Two. By the time we get to this history, right before the image of the beast, what do the horns look like? One is broken. The other one is still there, just like Antigonus's eye. One is intact and one is broken. Same thing with the horns. One is broken and one is intact. And the United States, you're saying the horns get broken. Yes, by this point, all the lamb-like characteristics of this beast are going to be defaced. Now, you don't see, what I want you to know is that you don't see the defacing of the horns explicitly mentioned in the chapter. Not that it's not there, but either it's under the surface. You have two options. Either it's under the surface and it is there, or you brought something into the chapter that's not there. And you got to be careful with that. So it's one of those options, and it doesn't really matter which it is in this moment. My sister?
And then once it is the image of the dragon, does it then become a problem?
Once it becomes an image of the dragon, does it then become a problem? Or the image of the beast is then...
Right. You can see it was the problem. The dragon was the problem. The lamb-like was the solution. But then it becomes the dragon.
It goes back into the problem again.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Yeah, yes. So we're going to mark so there's two ways you can come at this problem. So we're saying, my question was, how do we know when to end this process? And we said the solution here is freedom. So we can either say that this process of freedom is going to go all the way till the time of when freedom is lost. You know, you can do it that way, which we know would be the Sunday law. Or you can identify that you can identify the life cycle of the United States. And if we did that, we'd be bringing out other information that's not explicitly here, but you'd still come to the correct place at least, and that you could say the United States we know is going to die at the Sunday law. At least part of it is going to die. Which part of the United States dies? The lamb-like part. What is it's republicanism and Protestantism? Those two facets are going to be fully killed by this point here. So that aspect, the aspect of the freedom beast, the Republican beast, the United States as a republic, dies and ends here. And really, a new beast arises in the United States. It may still be the United States, but what is it now? It's not a republic. Think of Rome. Rome was a republic, then it was what? It was an empire.
It was an empire.
And what's at the head of an empire? An emperor, a dictator. So you have the Republic of Rome and you have the Empire of Rome. You have the Republic of the United States and you have the Empire of the United States. Which, what? Imperialism. So you have both of those there. Okay. So what we've done so far is we've marked the part where the seed begins, where the solution, it's not where the solution begins, but where the solution, I guess, is taking hold. I don't know the best way to say that. But we've marked this point here, 1798, and we've identified that the solution will culminate and be finished at the time of the Sunday law, based upon the fact that it's going to be part of the problem now. But I want to look at it from a little bit of a different perspective, if we can come back to that after lunch. And we've dipped into Revelation 13 a little bit and just looked at parable teaching. We looked at compare and contrast, juxtaposition, using the natural to illustrate the spiritual. All of those things helped us to create what we're looking at here with the problem and solution. We talked about the agricultural model generically. We set that model up and just mentioned it. And we're all familiar with it, so we don't have to prove it, which is why we didn't go into depth about it, because we're all familiar with it. And we began putting some points on this line, and we have 1798, and we have the Sunday law as these 2 points. The point when the seed is springing up, and then we have the point where the cycle is going to end, and the harvest we're at the time of harvest. Okay. Does anyone have any questions before we close? Is everyone following so far?
Yeah.
Okay. If you're not following, please speak up. I don't mind. Yep.
You say you have the problem with the fallow,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is the problem in the agricultural model, is the problem always starting with fallow, or can it sometimes be early rain or bad rain? Is the problem always at the fallow?
So it depends so here's the problem. And I don't know if this is where you're going, but are you thinking about like the tares?
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere.
Okay, you're just thinking about that in
I'm
general.
just trying to think, if you're trying to figure out where the problem is it always going to be the fallow?
On this line of thought, yes. The second you bring in the wheat and the tares, though, you bring in another element to it that is because the tares are a problem, and you can add that information into the agricultural model, which would place you here, where you're going to have not just a good plant, but you're going to have a bad plant growing as well, side by side. But we're not looking at the two plants in this aspect. We're just looking at one. We're looking at the good plant in this time. Yep. But yes, sorry, it always begins on the rule of thumb, the problem always begins back here. Because the ground is fallow. In the agricultural model, that's what the problem is. For us, it's you're in captivity to Rome, or you're, this or something. Could be anything. Yep, my brother, sorry.
So when you gave that image, can I shake somebody's hand and punch you at the same time? You're trying to develop what's in the heart, comes out as a reaction. First, as soon as you said that, a name popped into my head, which was Abraham.
Okay.
He went into the king, pretending to be good, and then ended up stabbing him and killing him. So that's the image. And that's why I read the verse, and with the verse again, and it says, "Horns like a lamb." And so, to me, it's not a lamb. It's like a lamb, so it's not. So in other words, to me, it made an attempt to be like a lamb, or try to be like a lamb, try to be innocent, try to be good, but it did not have the innate or inherent innocency of a lamb. Because if you had an innocency, a true lamb, then it could not have the dragon. So at the same time.
Why? Why couldn't it?
Because a lamb is a lamb. A true lamb, like Christ, is Christ. A true lamb can't turn.
Christ could have turned.
Well.
What happened to Satan?
Yeah, well, yes.
There was a lamb for you.
He was a lamb. Satan was created a lamb. Adam created a lamb. Something went wrong in the process. Let me talk to that just for a moment. And then we'll close. So my brother brought up the idea of being like a lamb, in suggesting maybe that's showing it's not actually a lamb. It's only like a lamb. And I just want to give an example of why there's a problem with that. So we have like a lamp. That's Revelation 13:11. Revelation 13:11. Let's go to Romans 8. And the question is in 13:11, does like a lamb mean not actually a lamb, but just like it, just similar to it? Romans 8, verse 3. For what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh, God sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin, condemned sin in the flesh. Let me ask, so now we have Romans 8:3. Did I say 8:3? Yeah, 8:3. And it's saying the likeness of sinful flesh. So my question is, let's talk about Christ, because we're probably more familiar with Christ. Did Christ come in actual sinful flesh, or is it just similar to sinful flesh? He came in actual sinful flesh. He came in just, the same stuff that you and I have. Not just the same stuff, but even the same, character to some degree. And by character, I mean, he had wants and hungers and this and that, those kind of things. So Christ came in the likeness of sinful flesh. So here, likeness actually just means he came in sinful flesh. So what I would suggest is that's the same thing here for Revelation 13:11 is the likeness of to be like a lamb is actually to be a lamb, or to have the characteristics of the lamb. So I think the United States, or this beast here, was fully a lamb, fully like a lamb. And the reason you brought up Ehud, that he went in deceptively and he killed, as a deception, and then he killed, forget his name, but he killed the king, Philistine king, I think it was. So with Ehud, you're saying he's pretentious. He looks like something, he's pretending to be something, but he's going to do something else. The problem with that is that the United States, from its conception, and we'll talk about this, isn't pretending to be anything. It is that thing. What's going to happen is, just like Satan, Satan started off perfect. Just like Adam, he starts off perfect. And something happens, and now for Satan it's a little bit more mysterious because he tempted himself. Adam and Eve were tempted by Satan. But the same idea is that you have a perfect thing. You have we'll say a perfect lamb, for instance. Though the whole beast isn't a lamb, it just has those characteristics. You have this perfect entity that is going to get corrupted by some means. And it's more like Adam and Eve than it is than it is Lucifer, because Lucifer is going to tempt himself. What's going to happen with the United States? What happens with the United States? Why does the United States fall? Whose fault is it? What? The people. It's always the people's fault, but which people? The Protestants. So it was the fact that why did the Protestants become the problem? Where did their problem begin? When they forgot their job.
When they started burying their parents.
When they rejected William Miller's, April 19th was their problem. Protestantism as a religion gets passed by, and the Protestants now are going to become the daughter of Babylon. So now Satan has a leg in the door. He's got a foot in the door, and he uses that space in the door to get all the way in and open the door. So he got the Protestants, and once he had the Protestants, he told the Protestants, "Hey, Protestants, go work on the political side of the aisle. Try to influence them." And eventually, as we are today, we're coming into this perfectly unholy union between church and state, and we see it really developing strong with Trump today, in his relationship with the evangelicals and the Protestants.
The fact that they become a mirror problem, because when a daughter grows up, you can see her mother.
Yep.
It's kind of like
Yeah, the daughter. Yeah. So that would be my suggestion, is that it's not that it's pretentious in this moment, though it becomes pretentious when it starts going against its own nature. But it started like Adam and Eve, it started off good, but it gets tempted and it falls for that temptation somewhere along the line. And we'll talk about that in our next, as we go forward. Maybe that's the next one, but as we go forward. Okay, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for this time that we've had. We thank you for your mercy and grace upon us and allowing us to understand these things. We pray that you would help us to internalize these truths as we look at parable teaching and the history of the United States. We pray that you would help us to see history through your eyes, Lord, that you would help us to have the mind and heart of Christ, Lord, that we could see history, that we could see your footsteps in time, to see the grand truths that you would have for us, Lord, the deep and profound principles that you are trying to not only have us see externally in the world and in the way you've led nations, but for those principles to become a part of our nature and our hearts, Lord. We ask that you would cleanse our hearts of its impurity, and we pray that you would just guide us to a correct understanding of your truth and your will. We thank you and we love you, and we ask that you would be with us now as we have lunch, and we pray that you bless the hands that prepare it, and that you bless it for us, Lord, that it would be to the strengthening and nourishing of our bodies. And we ask for your guidance now, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay, so what time are we back?
We are back. What time are we back? It's a good question.
No, I'll let them know.
I have a schedule. 1 second. My schedule says 3:45.
Yeah, I don't know.
Whatever you want. That's just what we wrote down, but you change it however you want.
Yeah, I don't know how much time we need, because lunch was going to start at 2, because I have to run home and get my food item. So we might be able to start a little sooner, so I don't know.
Whatever you want.
You tell me, because I'm going to put it on the screen for these guys.
So, yeah.
Just put a tentative.
Because I don't know if we can get back, if people want to take a walk after lunch, we need a little time to do that. I don't know, Elaine, maybe they can start gathering around 3:30. I don't know if we will be able to start at 3:30.
3:30?
Or 3:45. If it changes. So give that.
Should I put 3:35 or leave it?
Yeah, put whatever. Yeah.
She'll start to come. Start to come.
How many presentations do we have?
Try to be back by.
We have 2 and then questions.
Okay.
Just put
Question answer is the last. Okay. Yeah, I need
Okay.
That's funny you put it on a Word doc. That's cool.